Bonjour, mes amis. Aujourd'hui, c'est magnifique. Je suis libre aujourd'hui. Je m'appelle James Fayette. Nous sommes libres aujourd'hui. Translation, good evening. My name, my friends, my name is James Fayette. Now, today is truly magnificent. It is magnificent because I am free. My name is James Fayette, and it is magnificent also because you are free. Now, I would ask you to indulge me in just a while. Now, I hope you are very knowledgeable about the American Revolutionary War. Do you know who the traitor was? Benedict Arnold, exactly. So when I say the word traitor, indulge me by saying Benedict Arnold. Though I'm known to history as James Armistead Lafayette, I never used the surname Armistead. I simply went by James. Now, it was thought that most of the time slaves adopted the names from their masters. This was the case sometimes, but this was not always the case. In some cases, like mine, we chose the name of someone who was influential in our lives. We chose the name of someone who we admired the most. So, when I became a free man, I chose Fayette, a name associated with the man who I admired so much, who I had dear to me. Now, you're probably wondering, why Fayette? Why not Lafayette, as the history books report? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about that later in my story. You're also wondering, how can an enslaved man from a plantation in Virginia be so acquainted with the French language? As a young child, I learned to read, write, and speak French right next to my young master. Now, it was not uncommon for the master of the plantation to pick an enslaved child for his child to grow up with. But to have that child educated right next to him, much less insist upon it, was rare indeed. Now, as an adult, I communicate with Lafayette in French. It bonded me to him. It endeared me to him. It was also one of the many ways that Providence would prepare me for my role as Lafayette's spy. Really, who would suspect, if discovered, any communication in French that it had been written by an enslaved? It was the perfect cover. Yes, you agree with that, don't you? Back to my childhood. As a young child, I was the constant companion of William. He and I were always together. So when I came of age, I followed in my father's footsteps. Now, his name was simply Armistead. He was a body servant to William's father, John. Now, this is where I wanted to be like him. So when I became of age, I became the body servant to him. William and I were everywhere, always together. So we grew up together. Now, this was, let's see, I was, as William's body servant, I was there with every one of his dealings, every one of them. It was no different that summer's day, 1781, I believe it was, where William and I were issuing supplies to Armistead's army, to, Lafayette's army. I can't remember whether it was Lafayette or William who decided that I would become a great spy. But it gave me a lot to consider. On one hand, I could gain my freedom by fighting for the patriot cause, but as I've learned, that was no guarantee. On the other hand, this particular occupation that I had as a body servant provided me safe passage through British lines. There, I could defect, I could gain my freedom and declare my allegiance to the crown. I had found a long time ago, the political powers are like the prevailing winds. They cannot be trusted. My trust was reserved for chosen few, and how Gilbert du Montpied infiltrated that circle of trust is a mystery to me. He had a purity of spirit about him that could not be denied. Now, there were other factors. Leaving Sylvia for a season. But siding with the British could mean leaving Sylvia forever. No. If I were to fight or to spy, it would be for this Frenchman or not at all. So a plan was devised where I would pose as a runaway slave. I would be a servant to Lafayette. During the day, we would go foraging, I would go foraging, I would be his guide. But during the nighttime, I would learn the ins and outs of being a spy. Often the night conversations led to family and friends, and he would talk of his lovely Adrian, and I would talk of my beautiful Sylvia. I would tell him stories about my father. He would mourn the loss of the father that he never knew. But that loss was replaced by stories of his family on the battlefield. That's when I came to know the name Fayette, the history of the name. The name refers to a land of birch trees. The birch trees with its silvery bark is graceful and sophisticated, but underneath that beauty lies a wilderness for something to grow that no one ever can, that nothing ever can. Its branches are beautiful, and it's usually the first to regrow after a harsh winter or after a fire. Its leaves are the first to appear after a fire or harsh frost. I came to learn the characteristics of this noble tree mirrored the image of my newfound friend. I also noticed those same qualities in me. So taking the name of Fayette was not only a tribute to Lafayette's character, but it was an acknowledgement of my own. Now, when Lafayette thought I was ready, I traveled to Portsmouth to infiltrate the camp of the traitor. You're getting it. I would, once again, pose as a runaway slave. I would do foraging for him, offer as my services as a guide, sit down among the campfires. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saves a wretch like me. But who could ever imagine that after such a short time, I would be serving tea to the turncoat and the traitor during strategy meetings with his troops. Or who could ever believe I would be so familiar with his habits as to plan an attempted abduction? I lit a candle in the window upstairs. This was to let Lafayette and his soldiers know that everything was going as planned. As usual, I was at headquarters, the home of Mr. Robertson, right on the corner of Middle and High Street. I was there for one reason, and one reason only: to prepare a special tardy for the general, as was his custom. At nighttime, the general would take his long walks down to the sugar house right on the corner of Crawford Street. That's where the soldiers and the prisoners would lay their head. They would lay there dreaming of their days in battle, dreaming of ways to escape. They would dream of their trusty little children, or they would dream of their families, their wives, their favorite fishing hole, their favorite dog. It didn't matter. All the general was concerned with was all was quiet. And being such an arrogant man, preferring solitude, he would refuse the notion of an armed guard walking down the streets of Portsmouth. He would say, "Oh, it's perfectly safe." What it was the perfect situation for a kidnapping. The streets were especially dark that night. It was a new moon. The clouds covered the starlight. Now, Lafayette would be miles away before it was even discovered that the general was missing. And me, of course, I would prove valuable because I knew the terrain. Now, this was the plan, and it was a good one. But once again, Providence had her say. Suddenly, there was a bustling downstairs. I thought maybe I had been discovered. So I quickly ran upstairs to extinguish the flame. After extinguished the flame, I quickly came downstairs. Quickly, the general was out the door with an entourage. I fear I might have been discovered. I paused. What should I do? Should I stay, hope my cover had not been discovered? But if I ran, I would be of no use to the colonists. I peered out the window. There was some commotion. What it was, I don't know. And once the general returned, I refrained from asking because I did not want to arouse suspicion. But there would be no more attempts, no more. It was far too risky. Not only that, the general would be leaving the region of Portsmouth soon, and a much larger bird was about to land in our midst. One that we would set a snare for, the likes of no one could have imagined or foreseen. Now, when I heard the great Charles Cornwallis would have a base in Portsmouth, I was a little concerned. You see, Lafayette had confided in me. His respect and his fear for the great general. I happen to know also that Cornwallis detested Benedict Arnold, so I could not expect any easy transition from one to another. No, no, no. I had to earn his trust. Who could ever imagine? After such a short time, the great General Cornwallis would enlist my services as a spy. Now, being a double agent, I could move easily between enemy lines. I could move freely. Now, understand this. Being a double agent meant double the danger. I ran the risk of being discovered. I ran the risk of being shot or hanged by an overzealous soldier. I had to be extra careful. During the surrender at Yorktown, I was hidden in the crowd. The fife and drum had been playing, and everyone awaited the arrival of the great General Charles Cornwallis himself. Then his second appeared, carrying his commander's sword, approaching slowly General Washington. Lafayette was not amused, and Lafayette, being Lafayette, ordered the fife and drum to change the tune to Yankee Doodle. Now, I understand this tune was relegated to a children's song, if I'm not mistaken, but before the war, the British used it to taunt the colonists. Now, though please, Lafayette was not yet finished twisting the knife. That evening, as Cornwallis appeared in Lafayette's tent, there in the corner was an unexpected guest. Me. It was at that moment when he realized that I had become the instrument of his demise. "Oh, you rogue! You have played me a trick. You know." Well, that's the account that your history books would have. 3 months later, Lafayette returned to France, and I returned to the Armistead farm. You know, William and I, we always had a great life. Life had always been pleasant with William. When I returned, I had the taste of freedom, and I longed for it that much more. We would often talk about how I would risk my life to secure freedom for others, but I could not get freedom for myself. I realized that William was powerless to help me. In 1784, William was elected to the House of Delegates, and on August the 1st, I accompanied him to the Capitol. That same year, the Marquis de Lafayette returned. He was very disturbed to see that I was still enslaved, and he addressed the General Assembly, asking them to bestow the liberties of freedom upon all citizens. After that, we three conspirators got together again. But this time, we were not conspiring for the freedom of a nation. we were conspiring for the freedom of one man, a man named James. Now, as was required, I would have to write a testimonial. I had to receive a testimonial from the Marquis de Lafayette. He wrote a ringing testimonial. William wrote a great petition for me. Now, that testimonial, many thought that it may have been lost, but I took great pains to memorize that testimonial. Every time I even think about it, I can hear Lafayette reading it. This is to certify that the bearer, by the name of James, has acquitted himself with every commission I have addressed him to. I have given him several assignments, and he has asserted himself well. This is also to certify that the bearer of James has done great services for me. Signed, Marquis de Lafayette, November 1784. It was at that time when I realized my search for freedom had actually began when I climbed aboard that wagon in Lafayette's camp. And I was overwhelmed with joy. As the nation's guest, Lafayette returned. But before that, after I submitted my petitions, finally, January the 9th, 1787, Governor Edmund Randolph signed the petition that granted my freedom. Lafayette returned a few years later as the nation's guest. Me, poor as a church mouse, traveled from New Kent County to Richmond. We were all traveling there for the same reason, to get a glimpse of this man. But this time, things were a little different. William was dead. And his influence had died along with him. I was now an old man of 76. It had been, my Lord, 40 years since I had seen him. I, like everyone else, after I received collections from the Richmond Enquirer, was on my way to see my old friend once again. Everyone wanted to get a glimpse of Marie-Joseph Paul Lives Roche. Je vais du Montier, Marquis de Lafayette. As he saw me among the throng of people, he called out for his driver to stop. He ran, leapt out of his carriage, and ran to embrace me. Well, come to think about it, he was an old man with a bad leg. He probably never ran or never leapt. But it's my story, and I will tell it the way I remember it. There he was. Oh, that bittersweet reunion. Oh, the joy that I felt upon seeing him was only erased by the emptiness that I felt as I watched his carriage rolled further and further away. I knew I would never see him again in this lifetime. But I also knew his legacy, his story would always be a part of mine, and I a part of his. Au revoir, mon ami. Merci, mes amis. Thank you so very much. That last part I get a little emotional with because we're talking about freedom. We're talking about all of this, securing all of this to secure the freedom of one man. After he served his country literally single-handedly trapping Cornwallis on all sides in Yorktown, and still his country not recognize him as being a free man. Many have done so much less and received so much more. But this man, me, James Fayette, and by the way, your history books report Lafayette. Listen, Lafayette means the Fayette. There's only one Marquis. Thank you so much.